Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Twice as Lively with Ken Heckenlively. And yes, I am adjusting my camera. Let's see. Let's get that camera working well. Does that look good? That look good? Okay. All right. Okay. Like the camera placement now. Let me just adjust this a little bit. I want to get a little bit of the T-Rex there. Okay, maybe we want to do that. Okay. All right. That looks good. All right. I like that framing. So here we go with that simultaneous sip. Today's episode, the structure of corruption. We're going to be talking about, yes, Anthony Fauci, the public servant who took the fifth 111 times. As one commentator said, nothing says science like taking the Fifth Amendment 111 times. Yes, in the 20 years I was a science teacher, I always advised my students when challenged with a tough question to take the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution and invoke their right against self-incrimination. No, I never did that because that would be stupid. Science is not supposed to be a crime. What you do in science is not supposed to be a crime. What you do in science is supposed to be of benefit to the world. If you ever find yourself in front of a Senate committee and they are asking you questions about the science that you did, and your attorney tells you you should take the fifth, maybe you weren't doing science. But we'll get to all of that. Okay, let's start as we always do with that simultaneous sip. Yes, I have my wonderful Pete's coffee. It is a cafe Americano with a little bit of milk and honey, because you always want a little bit of sugar with your caffeine. That's my belief, and I'm sticking with it. So refreshing. It is 1:44 on the West Coast, which means in pretty much every part of the United States, it is before 5 o'clock, the universally recognized time after which it is socially appropriate to have alcohol. So if you are on the East Coast, you just need to wait about 16 minutes. And then if you would like to have an alcoholic beverage, that would be fine. But hopefully you are not having alcohol before 5 o'clock in the day, because that would suggest you might have a problem. And I don't want any of my viewers to have any problems. And speaking of that, I see you here now. And now I mentioned that you're looking very good these days. Have you lost weight? Have you been working out? Did you do something with your hair? Because you look very sexy today. All right, so we're going to talk about that appearance before the Senate committee by Dr. Anthony Fauci. Let's see if we can remove his license, right? Maybe that's the only thing that we're going to do. Okay, so everybody's been commentating about Anthony Fauci, and the reason you come here rather than other places is because I give you a little different take. So in these instances where we have a figure like Dr. Anthony Fauci appearing before Congress, and he takes the fifth 111 times. Did I mention that Anthony Fauci took the fifth 111 times? The man could not even answer the question about the color of his tie. Did he really think that the Senate would prosecute him for getting the color of his tie wrong? I've heard some people say, I thought Anthony Fauci was an evil genius, but he just looks like a teenage girl who can't get enough of herself on Instagram. So maybe that's a good way to look at him. But as I said, the reason you come here rather than other podcasts is because while I will focus on the personality, I'm also going to focus on the structure. And so you should probably know that I first heard the name Anthony Fauci in 2012 when my co-author, Dr. Judy Mikovits, asserted that he was behind the attack on her discovery of the XMRV retrovirus and its link to chronic fatigue syndrome. So, put very clearly, XMRV was supposed to be the likely causative agent of chronic fatigue syndrome, which appears mainly in women, the same way that HIV was linked to the development of AIDS in primarily gay men and IV drug users. So, in 3 significant books about her work with XMRV and 1 book that we did on masks, we had no problem pointing to Anthony Fauci as the villain in the attack against the chronic fatigue syndrome community, because he seemed to believe that chronic fatigue syndrome was a psychological problem where women in the workforce who were at the top of their game suddenly developed psychological problems because they couldn't handle the pressure. No, they didn't have a disease. They had a psychological problem. So how does somebody like Anthony Fauci get to be in charge of so much? And how is he perceived by many to be the grand master of science? Well, in the 3 books that I did, which went after Anthony Fauci specifically, Plague of Corruption, and Ending Plague, what we found, or what I found, is that from the very beginning, Anthony Fauci and a couple other people like Francis Collins were really behind this consolidation of science. Let me talk about what science should be. Science should be about independent groups of scientists pursuing research that is in the public interest. And when they come up with findings that seem like they would help the community, then they publish those findings, and then there will be a back and forth debate. And we talk about it as sort of the democracy of science. It's to my mind, it's very much like what you would see in the legal field. You know, people assert things, you go to this place called court, you fight it out. Each side gets to make their best arguments, and some people who are not interested in the results, that they're free of bias, will render a decision on whether that research is good or not. But really, starting in the 1980s, and this is also why I think you should come to listen to somebody like me, because I will express my admiration for previous political figures like Ronald Reagan, while also pointing out things that they got wrong. So one of the things that Reagan did, which I think was very destructive, is that he fired a whole bunch of people, a whole bunch of scientists as a cost-cutting measure, and brought them back as independent contractors. This had the effect of making it so that there could be really overlords of science. And Fauci realized that this overlord system of science could work to his benefit. And so what he maneuvered to do was get himself placed as one of these overlords. And so by 1984, he is in charge of the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases, NIAID. That covers a lot of ground in science. And because Fauci was one of these people who really didn't want to ever leave government service, the longer and longer he stayed, the more political power he accumulated, such that when COVID hit America, I think the Trump administration found it very difficult to deal with them because Fauci was part of the permanent government. So this is not to say that Fauci started out as a bad man, but the system that was created partially by Anthony Fauci kept him in as a virtual czar of science. And whenever you create a system which doesn't allow for transparency, doesn't allow for competing power centers, you will inevitably get corruption. That is something that our founding fathers realized very early on. And what they set up in our government was multiple centers of power, not because they believed that any center of power was bad, but it would inevitably become corrupted because people would tend to favor their friends and dislike their enemies. And the only way that you could really manage that is to have competing power centers. So understand that what Fauci did in his decades in government was to consolidate and streamline science, putting himself at the top of the pyramid. Any time you do that, there will inevitably be corruption. It's just a law of the universe. It's like day follows night. None of us are angels. Let me say that again. None of us are angels, which means none of us should have supreme authority. By the same token, none of us are devils, which means none of us should be forever prevented from speaking or getting our message out. We're all in some mixture of being angels and devils. And so what we do to focus on the good and hopefully get rid of the bad is we're open, honest, and transparent. And if somebody doesn't believe we're being open and honest, well, we go and we sit down with them, and maybe we do it in front of a bunch of people, and we try to hash it out. Yes, that can be messy. I understand that the inclination is not to do that, that you get power, you may have exercised it effectively, and you think, nah, these are the good guys. The other people, they're not good guys. And, we got to watch over things. No, that is how you get tyrants. And nothing demonstrated that more clearly to me than the so-called Fauci diaries, which were released by Senator Rand Paul. Now, to correct some misapprehensions out there, what Fauci did during his time in government was he used government servers to, in a sense, record what he had done. Ostensibly, the reason he had done this is that he was going to use those diary entries for a book that he would write after he left government service. However, since he created those diaries on a government server, they were not his. Senator Rand Paul and Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. are correct in saying that those are not Fauci's private diaries. They are the diaries that he wrote on government servers. Therefore, those diaries belong to you and me, and I'm glad we're finally able to read some of it. There's a lot there. And even though they are his diaries, I still suspect there are some things he kept out of them. But because I am an individual who believes in truth, believes in documentation, what I'm going to do is I've printed out some excerpts from the Fauci diaries as prepared by Senator Rand Paul. And I'm going to go over some of the critical things. And I'm also going to link Anthony Fauci to my co-author, Dr. Judy Mikovits, because for years we have been making the claim that the investigation into XMRV was derailed by none other than Anthony Fauci. That assertion has been proven true by the release of the Fauci diaries. I am going to read exactly the entry in the Fauci diaries, which shows that he was interested in destroying the work of my co-author, Dr. Judy Mikovits. So one of the great things that Senator Rand Paul did is on the first page of many of the releases, they've got sort of a summary of things that are in the diary. So remember, this is something created by Senator Rand Paul, but it is an accurate reflection of what is in the diaries. And so it wasn't even 2012 or 2014 that Anthony Fauci was sticking his nose into things in ways that were not good. He was even doing it around 9/11. So I'm just going to go over some of the things that Fauci has been up to over the years, and then you can determine whether COVID was more like another day as usual with Fauci or whether it was something unique. So this is from the release from Senator Rand Paul. You can find this on his website, Tony's Diary, the prequel. Before COVID made him a household name, Dr. Anthony Fauci was already writing it all down. Read Dr. Fauci's own recollection of events from 2001 to 2015, in which he documents his role in creating the federal biodefense complex and his access to the classified world that drove it. Yes, you may be asking yourself, why is it that Dr. Anthony Fauci has the highest pension of any government employee? Well, it's because not only was he working in public health, he was working in bioweapons development. That's right. That's right. Your friendly neighborhood Dr. Fauci is a spook. That's the only way you can accurately characterize him. His day job is being America's doctor. His night job is working, building biological weapons to kill the enemy. Even though that's technically illegal, because we've signed agreements that we won't do that. All right, here we begin. He knew the public wasn't getting the truth about anthrax. During the 2001 attacks, a scientist at the Army's infectious disease laboratory told Fauci the anthrax sent to Senator Daschle was weaponized, better, he said, than any bioweapon of anthrax the United States had ever made. Days later, the Office of Homeland Security went on television and said he'd been told it was garden variety. Fauci wrote that he was floored and that someone is intentionally not telling Governor Ridge the truth, or he is masking the truth. He mentioned it to two Health and Human Services officials, hinted at it to NBC's Tim Russert and Senator Lieberman's and McCain, and predicted there will be hell to pay when the American public realizes that it has not been dealt with in a totally open manner. So Anthony Fauci is letting a lie sit. The anthrax that was sent to some senators' offices in the wake of the September 11th attack, senators who were concerned about the Patriot Act and what was being done in response to 9/11, suspiciously had this biological weapon sent to their offices. Do you think that the bad guys like Al Qaeda would be sending anthrax to the people who didn't want such a big war? Let's think about that, shall we, boys and girls? Who would be most interested in sending biological weapons to senators who didn't want a blank check for war? Tell you what, because I believe you can make up your own mind, I'll let you decide that one. Okay. What about in the wake of 9/11? What did Anthony Fauci want from Vice President Dick Cheney? According to Rand Paul, Fauci asked Vice President Dick Cheney for DARPA-like powers. When Cheney asked what authorities he needed to run biodefense at NIAID, Fauci's list included sole source contracting, hint, hint, that's how you get a lot of corruption, rapid grants, and, quote, DARPA-like powers. He then briefed the vice president on what he called Project BioShield. In parentheses, he made up the name. Part of what was driving that buildup, by his own account, was CIA intelligence that Iraq has smallpox, the basis for plans to vaccinate as many as 10 million Americans. Yes. Fauci just wants power. Got it? Next, he wasn't impressed by the CIA. So that means that Fauci basically wanted to run the CIA because he felt like he should be above them. Take note, CIA officials. At a top secret meeting, White House meeting in 2008 on drug and vaccine-resistant anthrax, Fauci wrote that CIA briefers delivered soft, vague, and even embarrassingly bad intelligence of the kind he had sat through several times before. His private conclusion, quote, one gets a very bad impression of the quality of our intelligence based on meetings such as this. So, in this devil's gallery, who do we believe, Fauci or the CIA? I'm giving the point to the CIA because I may not trust them much, but I trust Fauci even less. Oh, and you should also know that supposed moratorium on gain of function research was not all it was cracked up to be. So, quote, the, quote, voluntary moratorium was involuntary. In 2012, with data from Ron Fauci's lab leaking out, and the White House was asking whether to cut off his money. Fauci worried that, quote, outside non-scientific influences would force us to stop funding these flu projects. Yes, Fauci was concerned that you, the public, were thinking, hey, maybe it's not such a good idea to create a super flu. Well, Fauci says you don't get to decide that. Fauci gets to decide it. I am Mr. Science. I'm Fauci. Let me decide. You're too stupid to know. So he reached Fauci at his home in the Netherlands at 10:30 at night and warned that if the scientists didn't pause on their own, quote, the security people would force a defunding. Fauci folded the next morning. The world was told scientists had policed themselves. Yes, do you understand how Fauci is a puppet master? You have been told for years that the scientists decided to take a pause on gain of function research in 2012 because they were being so respectful and safe. No, it was Anthony Fauci. All right. This is the one I love. I was home at last night with my wife, and I was talking all about the Fauci diaries, and suddenly I said to her, honey, I bet that in the Fauci diaries, I can find the name Judy Mikovits. And my wife looked at me and she goes, nah. I said, honey, I'll see you in an hour. It took me about 10 minutes looking through the Fauci diaries to find page 239 out of 465, the conversation about XMRV and chronic fatigue syndrome. So remember, Fauci is the head of NIAID, National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases. So, just to recount what is in my book Plague with Dr. Judy Mikovits, is that Judy had found the XMRV retrovirus in a population of patients with chronic fatigue syndrome at a rate of about 67%, and she'd found it in about 3.7% of controls. So this is a good association, especially since the testing was a little bit primitive. And so they actually, as they did some further experiments, they found it to be much more, the infection rate to be much higher. There are a couple of reasons why this hasn't been found before, because the virus seems to hide in tissues. And so it's manipulating the immune system from inside the tissues. And it's only when the immune system is almost completely destroyed that you can detect it. At least that was her theory. So, and in science, when you have a discovery that is different, what you're trying to get is confirmation. You're trying to get confirmation from another scientist with a similar level of respect in the field, or somebody even greater. And they had gotten that. They had gotten that in the form of an investigation by Harvey Alter, who would go on to win the Nobel Prize. Did I mention that Harvey Alter, who confirmed that XMRV is found in association with chronic fatigue syndrome, has the Nobel Prize? Did I mention that the work of Dr. Judy Mikovits on XMRV and chronic fatigue syndrome was confirmed by Nobel Prize winning scientist Dr. Harvey Alter? He got his Nobel Prize for the treatment of hepatitis C. Okay, so this is August 18th, 2010. Oh, let me amend something I said. I have known that Fauci is a villain since 2010, because I was working and talking with Judy at this point. So here is from Fauci's own diary, August 18th, 2010. Now think about this. He sits at the summit of science. He gets to determine what's true and what's not. So what do we find that he writes on August 18th, 2010? Remember how science is supposed to be done. Science is supposed to be done by independent groups. He's not supposed to be putting his finger on the scale. I'm going to read all of this to you. And just to let you know, it's kind of big. It's one of the biggest segments that he has in his entire diary. Big controversy regarding the conflicting studies of the role of XMRV, xenotropic mouse leukemia virus-related virus, in chronic fatigue syndrome, CFS. Two papers coming out almost simultaneously from FDA, Shai-Xing Lo, and at the NIH and Harvey Alter, in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, and the CDC in retrovirology. FDA NIH paper. So remember, that's the Food and Drug Administration the National Institutes of Health with Nobel Prize winning author Harvey Alter. That's the paper that confirms Judy's XMRV paper. FDA NIH finds correlation 86% versus 8% in normals, while CDC finds no correlation. I have been involved in trying to get to the bottom of this prior to publication of discordant results, since we knew of the data before the papers were published. First of all, you're not supposed to be doing that. That's not how science runs. Science runs when groups of scientists do their own research, they present them to the journals. It's supposed to be a private process in which government officials are not coming in and sticking their fingers on the scale. This is scientific misconduct. Anthony Fauci should not have been trying to figure out these papers before they were published. That is a legal violation. He knew of the data before the papers were published. That's not the way science works. Okay, boys and girls? Not the way science works. But it's what we've come to expect from Anthony Fauci. Here's what he writes. I believe that the FDA NIH study is contaminated, and I do not believe Shiloh, since in the late 1980s he had claimed with what appeared to be foolproof data that AIDS was associated with a new species of mycoplasma as a cofactor. The data proved to be spurious, but people seem to have forgotten about this. I have convinced Ian Lipkin from Columbia Mailman School of Public Health to referee coded sample examination of FDA looking at negative samples from CDC studies. The exercise was somewhat inconclusive. Lowe does not want to do another study starting with identical CFS samples that are coded together with known normals and known spike samples to really settle this, because they used all their original data. It was from patients in the 1980s. They can't go back in time and get samples from those same patients in the 1980s. The issue is a highly emotional CFS crowd. Imagine that. He's calling sick people highly emotional. Yes, if you have a terrible disease, which often requires you to be in your room with the drapes drawn 23 hours a day, yes, I would want some treatment. I might be a little bit emotional about that. The issue is that highly emotional CFS crowd now wants to treat CFS people with antiretroviral drugs, despite no evidence of causality and several negative studies besides the CDC study. You know what was happening with antiretroviral drugs at that time? They had learned how to use them so safely that they were given to babies born to HIV positive mothers. So why is it that these antiretroviral drugs could be given to babies, but they couldn't be given to chronic fatigue syndrome patients who had been sick in many cases for decades? That is Anthony Fauci. Okay. Another time. Let's see. May 10th, 2012. This is from page 286 out of 465 in the Rand Paul release. May 10th, 2012. Met with old friend Ron Dellums, former chair of House Armed Services Committee and former mayor of Oakland. He has retired from politics and wanted to chat with me about opportunities in consulting in global health. He had come on the original trip with Tommy Thompson in 2002 to Africa. I referred him to Stuart Simonson. Reviewed data with Ian Lipkin over the phone of study that he coordinated. Data showed that the prior studies from Judy Mikovits and Harvey Alter, Shiloh, indicating a connection with XMRV-MLV and chronic fatigue syndrome were in fact artifact, and there is no connection. Oh, yeah. That's Anthony Fauci. You know, no answer to chronic fatigue syndrome. Yes, Anthony Fauci inserting himself into science. What is probably not in those files is how much he wanted to kill that association. Why did he want to kill that association? Because XMRV is a mouse retrovirus. And the $1 billion, maybe $1 trillion question is, how in God's name did a mouse virus get into humans? We have shared the planet with mice for millions of years. The answer, unfortunately, is in the medical literature. The medical literature that I found and they were terrified about is the first outbreak of chronic fatigue syndrome happened in 1934, 1935 at Los Angeles County General Hospital among 198 doctors and nurses who were working during a friggin' polio epidemic. Why would the doctors and nurses get this new disease? Well, they got a new treatment. That's right, an early polio vaccine, which was grown in mouse brain tissue. That same polio vaccine, an experimental one, was also given to 8,000 children. Who were those children? They tended to be the children of medical people. When did the first cases of autism arise? Well, strangely, the first cases of autism arose in the 1930s. And who were the first 11 children who were discovered by a Johns Hopkins doctor as having this new disease? The doctor had actually just written a textbook on childhood psychiatric disorders, and he had never seen anything like autism. The first 11 children with autism who were born in that 1934-1935 timeframe were also the children, overwhelmingly, of medical people and scientists. So, could a mouse virus be behind chronic fatigue syndrome and the development of autism? Very interesting, because what happens in autism? Well, something fails to develop in the brain, that social connection. What we know is that the development of a childhood brain needs massive amounts of energy. So, what would chronic fatigue syndrome look like in a developing child? Well, the body would choose to protect itself. So, maybe what they didn't want to say is that these vaccines transferred animal viruses to the human population, which left them very vulnerable to these diseases. The final piece of information from the Fauci diaries about my co-author, Dr. Judy Mikovits, one of the most unfairly maligned individuals of the past 1,000 years, is when COVID hit and Judy, knowing what a snake Fauci was, started criticizing him. A lot of people stood up and took notice, including these two criminals at the journal Science, Martin Enserick and John Cohen. And in their article, published May 8th, 2010, they said, fact-checking Judy Mikovits, the controversial virologist, attacking Anthony Fauci in a viral conspiracy video. So just for a little bit of context, the filmmaker, Mickey Willis, had recorded a 26-minute interview with my co-author, which went viral with more than 1 billion views. So let's zoom in, shall we? And so this is in his diary. And I guess the only thing that Anthony Fauci has to say about my co-author is crazy Judy Mikovits. Imagine that. So fast forward 6 years, Anthony Fauci stands revealed before the world as a mass murderer and a liar, somebody who takes the fifth 111 times. What about Dr. Judy Mikovits? Dr. Judy Mikovits deserves an apology from all of those who attacked her. Dr. Judy Mikovits deserves to be put in charge of our public health. Because let me tell you, Dr. Judy Mikovits is a scientist. She believes in the scientific method. If her research had been followed up, not only would there be better treatments for people with chronic fatigue syndrome, I think they would have solved the problems of autism, because I think that autism is also likely connected to this XMRV retrovirus. And if Judy had been in charge instead of Anthony Fauci, I know that no American money or biological materials would have gone from the United States to the Wuhan Institute of Virology to create the COVID-19 virus. Yes, I have been attacked, like Judy has, for the books that we wrote about chronic fatigue syndrome and XMRV. Our opponent was Anthony Fauci, who manipulated the system to get that research defunded and vilified. In wake of that terrible performance in front of the Senate committee, I demand that the public health establishment reinvestigate the question of XMRV, chronic fatigue syndrome, as well as autism. I think we're going to find out that the use of animal tissue in the creation of vaccines has led to an unprecedented viral spillover, which is harming so many of us. If that makes me an outcast, if that makes other countries want to ban me, if that wants to make another American administration attempt to pressure Amazon and other book retailers not to carry my books, so be it. I will stand proud for truth and people who are sick. And I don't care how many friends or family members I lose. I know that I will continue to be able to look myself in the mirror, and people like Anthony Fauci cannot. The future will belong to people like Dr. Judy Mikovits, who told the truth at great personal cost, and not people like Anthony Fauci. Anthony Fauci will go down in history as an example of what not to do in science. All right. Thank you. Have a great day. And as I always say, hopefully this isn't the best part of your day. Hopefully the best part of your day is when you go out and have real conversations with real people in front of you. All right. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.